Welcome, my dear listener. Settle in now. Let your body rest, and let the hush of the evening wrap gently around your heart. You're safe here. In this quiet space, where stories drift like soft feathers and love blooms slowly beneath them. Moonlight, tonight, let us wander gently into a tale of memory and longing. Of a willow tree that whispers secrets in the breeze. Of a woman who once heard a name spoken softly into the wind. And of love that waited, unspoken, beneath its branches. Let your breath deepen. Let your eyelids grow heavier and drift with me. Into the stillness. There was a softness in the air that evening, the kind that only came when the sun had almost left, but not quite. The sky was pale lavender, brushed with hints of gold, and the earth below was quiet in that way only twilight understands. May walked slowly down the old path behind her childhood home, her shoes silent against the mossy ground. The scent of honeysuckle lingered in the air, though the vines had long since stopped blooming. She paused beside the worn fence post where the paint had peeled in curling strips just as it had years ago. Time had moved forward, but here, everything still hummed with yesterday. She hadn't planned to come back, not really, but something gentle had tugged at her, soft as a sigh, a feeling that came in dreams and faded in the morning, like a memory made of light. And so, she had followed that quiet tug back to the willow tree. It stood as it always had, tall and slow moving, its branches trailing like green lace, swaying though there was hardly any wind. The long leaves brushed the ground in rhythmic hushes, and for a moment May stood still, just listening. She remembered the days when she'd sit beneath that tree with a sketchbook in her lap, drawing whatever the breeze whispered to her. The curls of bark, the shape of a cloud, the shadow of a boy she once knew, though she never dared draw his face. The willow had held her secrets. And once, only once, she thought it had whispered back, a soft sound on the wind. Not quite a voice, not quite silence. Her name, spoken like a wish. May stepped closer now, the grass brushing gently against her calves, her hand reaching out to touch the bark that felt cool and alive beneath her fingertips. There, near the base, her name was still carved into the wood, faint now, weathered by time, but there, May, the letters curved as if the tree had grown around them, not to erase, but to protect. She sank slowly to the ground, letting her skirt pool around her like still water. The willow swayed above her, branches folding inward like arms. A bird somewhere in the distance called once, then fell silent, and in that silence, she listened to the rustle of the leaves, to the hush of her breath, to the soft take of remembering something that never quite ended. May closed her eyes. She wasn't sure what she hoped for. But something inside her, something small and warm, still waited, still wondered, still believed. That love, like the whisper beneath the willow tree, could linger forever in the hush of a breeze. Later that evening, as the last of the light faded beyond the hills, May remained beneath the willow. The world had grown hushed, not empty, but full of the kind of quiet that feels alive. The tree above her rustled softly, its long branches swaying in rhythm with something unseen. It almost sounded like breathing, or a voice too gentle to disturb the hush. The air was cool now, tinged with the earthy scent of damp leaves and far-off rain. May opened her eyes slowly and looked upward through the curtain of willow fronds. The sky was dusted with early stars, pale and flickering like they were shy. Her fingers brushed the bark again, right beside her carved name, and she smiled faintly, not at anything in particular, just the way one does when they feel known by the quiet. Then it happened again, a movement in the air, a breeze that passed not above or around her, but through her, a soft thread of warmth that seemed to come not from the sky, but from the very roots of the earth. It danced between the willow leaves and circled once, twice, before continuing down a narrow grove beyond the tree. May stood, slowly brushing the leaves from her skirt. Her heart didn't race. Nothing urgent stirred in her, but there was a stillness. And within it, an invitation. She followed. The grove behind the willow was one she hadn't walked through since she was a girl. The trees here stood tall and close, but not crowded. Their branches arched above like a cathedral of shadows, lit only by moonlight and drifting glow motes, tiny golden lights that floated just above the underbrush, like dust made of dreams. With each step, May felt time fold The past and present laced together gently, the scent of night flowers, the low chirp of insects, the way the moonlight painted silver on her skin. She remembered once hearing that some forests remember people, that if you walk softly enough, they greet you like an old friend. This one did. The path beneath her feet was dappled with fallen leaves, not crisp or broken, but soft like velvet, cushioned and kind. Every so often, the breeze would return, brushing against her shoulder, then rushing on ahead like a guide too shy to speak aloud. May's hand grazed the tips of ferns as she walked. She passed a fallen log covered in moss the color of moonlight, and a cluster of wildflowers asleep in the dark. The stars above blinked through the treetops, and all around the world seemed to breathe in rhythm with her own slow heart. She came upon a small clearing. In its center stood a second willow, younger than the one she had known, but swaying just the same. Its branches shimmered silver in the dim light, and nestled beneath it was a worn stone bench, curved like a half moon and dusted with fallen leaves. And someone was sitting there, a man, quiet and still, head bowed slightly, a small leather journal open in his lap. The dim light caught in his hair and softened the shape of his face. He didn't look up as she approached, not at first, as if he, too, was listening to the quiet. May stopped at the edge of the clearing. She didn't speak. The breeze brushed past her once more, gentle and warm. It stirred the willow's branches and the corners of the man's journal. He looked up then slowly, calmly, and met her eyes. There was no startle in him, no surprise, just recognition. As if she'd simply stepped back into a place that had always been waiting. The clearing was still, not with awkward silence, but with a hush that felt soft and natural, like the space between heartbeats, or the way dusk pauses before letting the stars take over. May stood just within the ring of trees, her hand resting gently against the bark of a nearby trunk. The man beneath the willow watched her with quiet, steady eyes, not curious, not questioning, but calm, as though he'd known she would come. He closed the journal softly, the worn leather cover folding shut with the sound of paper brushing paper. Then, with the smallest tilt of his head, he offered a gentle smile. Not the kind people give when they meet for the first time. No, this was the kind of smile that remembered something, even if neither of them had the words for it yet. May took a step forward, then another, until she stood just a few feet from him. Moonlight spilled through the willow leaves and made dappled shapes across the bench, across her hands, across the man's folded fingers. He spoke first. His voice was low, warm, like the hush of summer wind through tall grass. "You found it again," he said. The place where the air still listens. May felt her breath catch, not in surprise, but in stillness. The words were simple, but they stirred something, not memory exactly, but familiarity. The way an old melody hums quietly behind your thoughts, even when you haven't heard it in years. "I followed the breeze," she replied softly. "It felt like a memory I hadn't lived yet." The man nodded gently, as though that made perfect sense. He gestured to the other side of the curved bench, a space left empty, as if it had always been waiting for someone else to fill it. May sat. Their shoulders didn't touch, not yet. There was space between them, soft, respectful, full of presence. But it wasn't empty. The silence they shared now was deeper than before, like the space had shape, texture, warmth. The willow swayed above them. A leaf drifted down and landed near the man's shoe. He didn't move. She glanced down at the journal in his lap. "You're writing," she murmured. "Always," he said, "but not always with words." May tilted her head slightly, smiling. "What else do you write with?" He turned a page, revealing a simple sketch, the curve of a tree trunk, the trailing sweep of willow leaves, a name softly etched at the base. May, her breath softened. "You remember, I was here the day you carved it," he said. "Didn't know what to say then, so I whispered it into the wind instead." She looked up at the swaying branches, the way they caught the light and scattered it like ripples on a still pond, "and the wind carried it," she whispered. "It did," he said, his voice barely above the hush of leaves. A long pause stretched between them, not empty, not uncertain, just full of quiet things that didn't need explaining. He reached down and plucked a small feather that had landed beside his knee, pale gray and downy, soft as breath. He held it out to her, not as a gift, but as an offering, simple and wordless. She accepted it gently, brushing the pad of her thumb across its edge. And then, without thinking, without effort, she leaned just slightly closer, her shoulder brushing against his in the faintest touch. Like a sigh settling into place, they stayed like that close button hurried, their breaths sinking with the breeze, their hearts quiet but gently awake. Somewhere above, a night bird sang once, then fell silent, and beneath the willow, two names lingered in bark, one carved by hand, the other carried by wind. Time, beneath the willow, softened. It didn't stop. But it no longer hurried. It moved gently, like the drifting of a feather through warm air. May and the man sat side by side, the silence around them folding inward like the petals of a closing flower, protective, calm, full. His name hadn't yet been spoken aloud. She hadn't asked. It didn't seem necessary, not now, not yet. There was something older than names between them, something woven from quiet glances and shared stillness. The moon climbed higher above the clearing, casting silver pools on the earth and painting their faces in the soft light of memory. The willow leaves whispered in their slow rhythm, rustling like old lullabies in a language only the heart understands. He turned slightly toward her, not fully, just enough that their shoulders stayed touching, and she could see the line of his jaw, the softness in his expression. "Do you remember," he said gently, "how the tree would sway more on days you were near?" May smiled, her voice barely a breath. "I always thought that was my imagination." He shook his head, slow and sure. "It wasn't. Some things listen better than people do." She let the feather roll slowly between her fingers, its weightless texture grounding her more than anything else could. "I used to dream under that tree," she said. "When I was young, I'd close my eyes and make up stories about the breeze carrying words to someone who was waiting to hear them. I didn't know who. I just believed someone might be listening." He nodded. "I heard them." May turned, her gaze meeting his in that soft and certain way, not searching, not questioning, just being. "You did?" "I came here often, never spoke much. I wasn't good with words back then. Not when people were near, but I listened, and once, just once, I whispered your name back." Her breath slowed. "I thought I imagined that too," she said. "Maybe we both did," he whispered. "Or maybe that's just how some kinds of love begin, quietly, long before we know the shape of it." The willow rustled above, sending down a slow drift of leaves. A few brushed her shoulder, one settled in her lap. She didn't move to brush it away. He opened his journal again and turned to a blank page. Then, using a soft graphite pencil, he began to sketch his strokes. Patient, gentle, barely making a sound. May leaned slightly, watching as the image took form. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't meant to be. But it was unmistakable, a pair of hands cupped together, holding a single falling leaf. "It's what I saw," he said quietly, "when you stepped into the clearing, like you were carrying something fragile, not because it would break, but because it mattered." A hush stretched between them again, not empty but full of something growing slowly, steadily, like roots under quiet earth. She looked down at her own hands, one still holding the feather. And then, with a calm that surprised even herself, she reached out and placed it gently in the center of his sketch. A pause. Then, carefully, his hand covered hers, not pressing, not holding tight, just resting, warm, steady, familiar. The willow whispered its soft lullaby above them. The stars blinked slowly. The air grew cooler, but neither of them noticed. They sat like that, together, still, aligned, not needing to speak. The feeling that had begun so long ago whispered once into the wind, and now quietly returned. The night deepened, folding itself softly around the clearing like a worn, woolen blanket. Moonlight pooled like water at the base of the willow, quiet and silver, illuminating the bench where May and the man now sat, not just near, but close. Their hands still touched lightly, palm to palm, not holding but resting together in a kind of shared stillness that asked for nothing more. The breeze slowed, gentler now, like a breath settling after a long exhale. The air was cool and laced with the scent of distant cedar and earth warmed earlier by the sun. The willow's branches no longer swayed as much, they hung low and steady, as if listening. May closed her eyes for a moment and leaned her head softly to the side, until it came to rest against his shoulder. There was no need for permission, no shift in the air. It was the kind of closeness that arrives like dusk gradually, naturally, and without question. He didn't move. He only tilted his head slightly until it touched hers, a soft anchor in the quiet. They stayed like that. No words, no rush, just two people beneath a tree that remembered everything, even what they had once forgotten. I used to wonder, May whispered after some time, if the whisper I heard was a dream. I never told anyone. It felt too sacred, too soft. He exhaled gently, the sound of it brushing her temple. I never forgot your name, he said. I whispered it only once, but it echoed longer than I ever expected. A pause. Then, slowly, he reached into the back cover of his journal and pulled out a folded piece of paper yellowed just slightly with age, its edges worn smooth. I wrote you a letter once, he said, but I never knew where to send it, so I left it under the roots of the willow. May sat up slowly and turned toward him, her fingers brushing the edge of the page as he offered it to her. Is it still meant for me? She asked softly. He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling just a little, tender and quiet. It always was. She opened the letter carefully. Inside, the words were written in the same patient handwriting as his journal's soft graphite. Strokes, a little smudged, a little weathered. It said, if you ever return to the place where the breeze knows your name, I'll be waiting. I'll be quiet as always, but I'll be there hoping you hear what I never had the courage to say out loud. May didn't speak. She simply folded the letter again, her hands moving slowly, gently, as if folding something sacred. Then she looked up at him. You were never far, she said. Even when I forgot the sound of that wind. You were always close, he nodded. So were you. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. Instead, she placed the letter between the pages of his journal, resting her hand over his once more. And this time, their fingers curled together, slow, steady, natural. No fireworks. No grand declarations, just a quiet yes. A soft recognition of something long awaited, quietly blooming now, in the hush beneath the willow. Much later, perhaps hours or perhaps only moments, time had become too soft to measure May, and the man still sat beneath the willow. The clearing had changed, though not in any way the eyes could truly see. The world simply felt quieter. Now, more complete, as if the breeze had delivered its message and was resting too. Around them, the night was a tender hush. The stars had deepened to a warmer gold, and the willow leaves no longer danced but hung in loose, peaceful curls. A single leaf drifted down now and then, each one moving with dreamlike grace, as if even gravity were reluctant to disturb the stillness. They had stopped speaking long ago, not from the absence of things to say but because the need for words had faded. Everything that mattered now lived in the space between heartbeats, between breaths. May leaned back slowly on the bench, her head tilted upward toward the canopy of branches above, their soft latticework filtering moonlight into delicate patterns. On her face, he sat beside her, his shoulder touching hers, their fingers still interlaced, not tightly, not possessively, but gently. Like two pages of the same book resting open on a quiet table, she whispered at last, not to him, not even quite aloud, but to the night. I think this is where love waits, she said. Not loud, not rushing, just still. He turned to her, his eyes filled with soft agreement, as if he'd always known, as if he too had waited not for a person, but for a moment just like this. The willow tree rustled once more, not with movement, but with presence, as if it exhaled, as if it had finally seen what it had been waiting for. And then May stood. She stepped toward the trunk of the tree, toward the place where long ago she had carved her name. She reached up now with calm hands and, just beside the old letters, carved a second name, slow, steady strokes of her fingertip first, then traced with a small stone the man past her from the forest floor. The names sat side by side, weathered and new, May Kalin. They didn't say a word. But both of them stood quietly, hand in hand, watching as the bark seemed to soften around the letters, folding in, as if accepting the names with relief. Above them, leaves drifted slowly down, spiraling like feathers. One landed gently on their joined hands, and still the night held them. In that place beyond urgency, beyond question, where nothing needed to be proved, and everything simply was. They turned together and walked back through the grove, not hurrying, not looking back. The forest opened for them, the glow motes lighting a gentle path, their light dimmer now, as if preparing for rest. As they disappeared into the hush of night, the willow tree stood quiet again. The breeze, satisfied, curled through its branches. One final time. And somewhere within the bark, the two names whispered together, not aloud, but in the language of leaves, of stillness, of love that had always been waiting. And now, dear listener, let the stillness settle around you. Let your breath slow, and your heart rest gently in your chest. You've wandered with us beneath a willow where love waited softly. You've felt the hush of hearts remembering. You've listened to the whisper on the breeze and followed it home. There is no need to rush away. Let sleep take you like the wind takes leaves. Slowly, quietly, and full of calm. Good night. And may your dreams be filled with soft branches, warm hands, and whispers that linger.